Okay, and here we are, hour number 3. Glad you're along tonight. Tomorrow's Friday. 1 week anniversary. Deborah Tavares is joining us tonight. She has, as usual, a trunk full of data that she's picked up along with Lou. I don't know how they do it, but they're on the road, traveling, going to conferences, listening, recording, doing amazing things to get information together to present on her website, one of them, stopthecrime.net, and on her program, heard here before this program each night, Monday through Friday. Hello, Deborah. Thanks for being here. How are you?
Well, Jeff, the bigger question is, how are you doing? Because I know that you were met with an enormous challenge a week ago. Well, almost a week ago tomorrow.
Yeah, it's, honestly, I've heard, I don't know if there's any, people say that often after a bad wreck, you don't hurt for a week, and then your body says, ouch, and if that's what's happening. I have a fever. I've got, see, the reason I got out of the hospital so quickly, I was supposed to be in there for 4 or 5 days, something like that. I got out the next day because of MRSA. All hospitals have MRSA.
Yes.
And I had a big gash on my shin, which is now, I just noticed my foot and my leg are swollen up, and I don't like that. So I was good to get out of there, but I've got to do something now. This could be something that needs more attention. And then my head, from being whacked around, was left in a state of ouch. It hurts.
Well, I can appreciate that, Jeff. Certainly we know that these deplorable technologies are being used on a more massive scale. In fact,
it's so easy to do, Deborah. It's just not, it's 1960s technology.
That's exactly right. In fact, I was going to be booking Dr. Ronnie Kilde, K-I-L-D-E.
I've heard of her.
Yes, an amazing woman. She was actually murdered in February of this year. She talked about microchips, implants, mind control, and cybernetics. Mm-hmm. And she spoke about all of these technologies and really was ringing the alarm. She had even gone to a conference that I was able to get some interviews out of in Belgium the beginning of the year, and had been talking with her until she was murdered. And it was a horrific situation, but all of these technologies are real. And I'm going to just read an email exchange so the listeners can understand. Between
you and she?
Well, no, I'll talk a little bit more about her in a minute, but I really want to get this out because everyone needs to hear this exchange. Now, I'm going to set it up. Sebastopol, California, about an hour north of the Golden Gate Bridge, was the original ground zero against the smart meters. This area was in force, protesting. There were arrests. We were shutting down local PG&E offices, and this was back in the late 2010 and early 2011 when this really ramped up. And in fact, around 2011, there was a PG&E employee who was the director of the smart meter division for PG&E. And actually, I had received a letter from PG&E asking if I would participate in a dinner meeting. And I RSVP'd and said, yes, Lou and I would be happy to attend. And they said, no, your husband can't come. We don't have enough seating.
Oh, please.
And it can only be you. Right. I did go, Jeff, and I attended a total of 3 meetings. They had various educators about the smart grid. They were showing us smart meters, explaining how they were going to work.
Do you think they could have shoehorned Lou in there somehow?
Oh, there's no question that he couldn't have been there. But he wasn't. And so what my main question at the first meeting was, is what would happen if tenants in buildings that property owners own are invited into a class action lawsuit because the illness is generated from all of the increased frequencies, and particularly since owners of properties were not given a choice at that time whether they wanted a smart meter or not. And they brought in an attorney, the PG&E attorney at the second of the 3 meetings. They said that there was only an hour that he could be there. And he admitted during the first half an hour of his discussion that he really didn't know much about the smart meters. There was a tremendous amount of information that he still had to go over. He spent a half an hour really saying nothing. And I was getting irritated looking at the clock because I realized I needed to get my question answered and asked and answered. So I held up a piece of paper and I said, "Excuse me, but let's just say, for example, that this is a summons that as the property owner of an apartment, we were given, and we're now invited to participate in expending our funds in a class action lawsuit because the tenants are claiming they are now ill. How is PG&E going to participate in the support of a lawsuit in these circumstances?" And he said PG&E would not be liable or responsible in any way, that they were mandated by the California Public Utility Commission. And it was around that period of time that the smart meter director, who was in attendance at the 3 meetings that I participated in, was caught trying to impersonate his identity and get into a Google group that we were all in, communicating about the smart meters, etc. And he was caught, again, lying about his identity. And this ensued in litigation, and ultimately there was a fine. He was fired, and it became quite a several-year lawsuit with PG&E. And I believe, as I recall, it was about a $400,000 lawsuit that ended up getting paid by PG&E. And during that period of time, I and others received phone calls from the San Francisco Chronicle asking how it felt to be spied on by our utility company. And that was just shortly after my arrest. I was arrested on 1/11/11, and I told the Chronicle that this did not surprise me that PG&E was spying on their customers, because that's exactly what the smart meters were doing. And I would not have expected anything short of their behavior, because not only are they spying, they're attaching pulsed microwave radiation frequencies on our homes in anticipation of further enhancement with all of the RFID chipped appliances and then the home area network.
Sure.
That we are all fried in our homes.
Right.
Needless to say, time went on. Of course, the entire push against smart meters got out of California, fortunately, and other states have been fighting it as well. What we did discover is that the entire opt-out was all part of a psychological maneuver to throw the activists against the smart meters off course, and for those that were outspoken to believe that they were being listened to. And the opt-outs were and always were only an appeasement plan to give people the illusion that the utilities worked for them and that the CPUC worked for us as well.
Right. We
actually found a document out of the sociology department out of Vanderbilt University that we have on the homepage of stopthecrime.net that talks about how they would socially engineer the utility companies in accepting the smart grid. So having that been said, again, this is around now August of 2011. PG&E has since come under fire on many issues, and certainly the fact that they have been in collusion with the California Public Utility Commission. So what happened in order to create the illusion that the California Public Utility Commission actually regulated the utilities, which they don't, it's all Rothchilds. They slapped PG&E on the hand and required a document release. Well, there was a large document release, as I recall, about 7 or so months ago, and different members in this group, this EMF safety network group that I'm a part of, were going through these documents that were released by PG&E. And I'm going to read to the audience a document release, and it is extremely disturbing with that background in mind of what I said about everything starting here, literally in Sebastopol, California, again.
Wonder why they picked Sebastopol.
That was, again, ground zero for the anti-smart meter movement. That was really day one of the...
Okay, but that's a good thing. Now, are they coming back and trying to punish Sebastopol?
Well, I'm going to read these emails, and you and the listeners can make out of this what you would like. And here we go. First, I'm going to just say that these emails were dated in August of 2011. There are only two emails. One is from the California Public Utility Commission going to PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. And again, you can type in PG&E followed by Rothchilds, and you will see that PG&E is Rothschild.
It's hard to believe. It's amazing. They're just in everything.
Yes, they are. So here's what's important to understand about these two emails. First of all, there were a total of 6 people involved in the emails, not just the 2 people that were communicating back and forth, but the 4 people that were copied in the email exchange. Right. And the people that were copied, here's an idea of who these people were. First of all, the subject of the email exchange was space weather risks. And the executive director of the CPUC was copied, the vice president of regulatory affairs, the CPUC attorney, and the interim director at the CPUC. And then, of course, the 2 people that corresponded directly and copied those 4 people. Here's the first email, again, dated August of 2011. This is from the CPUC to PG&E. I assume you're assembling a high-level task force of washed up and never were, yet somehow movie star handsome, former astronaut, to handle PG&E's response to the upcoming damaging space weather. Also, please dribble out one at a time over the next few months all internal memos, lawsuits, PowerPoint presentations, and officer cover-up directives in which PG&E is repeatedly warned about damaging space weather and chooses to do nothing, then has its lawyers blame its customers, a.k.a. Earthlings, for an adverse consequences resulting. Now, keep in mind, PG&E is involved in weather modification. In fact, I was personally on the 16th floor of the PG&E buildings in San Francisco, where they monitor the weather, and they have pulled permits to inject cloud seeding and, of course, more here in Northern California. Here's the second email now in response to that email I just wrote that was from the CPUC to PG&E. Now, this is only within about 10 minutes.
Can you talk a bit louder, Deborah? I think we're getting a little low. There we go. Now we're there. Yeah,
this is only about a 10-minute delay before there's an answer back from the CPUC email from PG&E. This is now from PG&E. Just a reminder, we are the first to propose a solar generator in space that will beam RF waves down to a receptor site and convert it to DC current. We have changed our receptor site from the Mojave Desert to Sebastopol, California. Now, this is a very alarming. I sent this email exchange to some higher-ups, and I received some responses to this email and what they believe is meant. And this is the first comment response to this email exchange. I consulted with a top expert, a man who was a high official in an American electronics company with a classified job and deep knowledge about these matters. I have been able to come up with the following. This system is set of orbital sun collectors, which will concentrate sunlight and convert it to microwaves and send it down to a station to generate power. It, however, could be used by aiming to any target below within a certain radius to completely destroy all human life slowly in a large city. Very dangerous, unneeded means of generating power now that we have so many free energy means available. Obviously, most energy providers are associated with and under the control of the U.S. government and Intel. Here's the second comment to this email exchange. I agree with your assessment. This email exchange dated 2/11 is indeed very disturbing. I submit it is merely a wisp of the smoke from a recently fired gun, the visible tip of a very dangerous iceberg. I strongly suggest you immediately file a series of Freedom of Information Act requests targeting both the CPUC and PG&E in order to hopefully get a fuller picture of this complete iceberg and what has transpired concerning this to date.
Okay.
You, as a California resident, have every right to know what your public utilities are doing with your rate dollars. As you know, beamed microwave radio frequencies from space are the patented technique for manipulating the Earth's jet streams in order to turn selectively modified weather patterns worldwide. Climate change is genuine. However, I submit it is simply not the result of excessive human carbon emission footprints as infamously claimed. The potential to generate electricity from beam RF waves is certainly a possibility with the existing technology, but I submit it is not the primary goal. I submit the necessary outer space RF generators are already in place and have been functional for at least a decade and a half. This is a very interesting trail of damning breadcrumbs that needs to be followed up, in my opinion. Then I have another comment, and this is interesting. The attached emails claiming the beam RF waves to Sevastopol is obviously a joke shared among PG&E and PUC staff. The technology for this has not even been developed, financed, or tested.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. And here's a comment back to that. Sadly, the tech has long since been used. Space-based weapons in conjunction with the wireless networks, along with frequencies used to disperse crowds, etc., are old technologies. Most people are unaware just how advanced tech has become. 6 people were involved in these emails, PG&E and CPUC, and the tech is real. So joke or not, when someone yells fire, we must investigate, don't you think? And then there's attachments showing the involvement of PG&E with weather weapons, which they are heavily engaged. As you know, Rothschild owns Weather Central. And also the involvement of Rothschild and PG&E. So what we had was an obvious targeting to incapacitate the initial group against the smart meters, because certainly when we read the documents about the successes of the deployment of the smart grid worldwide, California is mentioned repeatedly as being the troublemaking state for the refusal of smart meters initially. So I just want everyone that is listening to understand the degree and the types of weapons, because, Jeff, you certainly experienced the likelihood of weapons while you were in your vehicle, and they use these weapons on cities and crowd disbursement, and they can increase anger. They can cause all kinds of physical problems that people normally would not.
Absolutely physical and emotional problems as well. We have to keep in mind that we are electrical beings, and there's a frequency for damn near everything. So if they blast you with it, you're going to get that kind of a response.
That's exactly right.
If it's go to sleep time, we just take a half second, and your car is out of control. And I'm not saying that's what happened. I don't know. I don't like to be dramatic about things, but it's certainly a possibility.
Well, that's absolutely right. Now, I just wanted to share with the listeners on Ronnie Kilde's behalf, because she was murdered, and she spent many years getting out the information of targeted individuals, those people that are targeted with electromagnetic weapons, harassed, traumatized, and tortured. Generally, their employment is eliminated. They are injured constantly. They're in pain. They suffer. And this is a real reality globally. And tracking teams and ground area networks literally focus in on individuals. And it's like an SS ground mafia team, a network. It's massive. It's unbelievably unreal, which is why people are not understanding what's happening. But I'm just going to read a little bit of a paper that Ronnie wrote in December of 2000. And she talked about Musada, the father of the Information Society. And he stated his concerns in 1980 that our liberty is threatened, an Orwellian style, by cybernetic technology totally unknown to most people. This technology links the brains of people via implanted microchips to satellites controlled by ground-based supercomputers. The first brain implants were surgically inserted in 1974 in the state of Ohio. And I'll continue with this on the other side of the break, Jeff.
Very
and
good.
Then we'll get into some of the most current water news.
Okay, very good. Deborah Tavares and I will be right back in just a couple minutes. Glad you're along on this Thursday night, and we shall continue right after this. Okay, I'm back with Deborah and talking about things that most people would never believe, but they're all true. Okay, Deborah, go ahead.
Well, yes, Jeff. I'm reading, as I was saying in the beginning, a article that was written by Dr. Ronnie, R-A-U-N-I, Lena, L-E-E-N-A, Kilde, K-I-L-D-E. It was an MD. She was also the former chief medical officer of Finland. So I think people need to understand the clout that she had in Finland. And
chief medical officer of the country, the government of Finland.
That's correct.
All right.
And so it's important for everyone to listen. If you want to look up any of her articles, I would certainly encourage it, because she was a brilliant woman and gave her life to get this information out. So prior to the break, we were talking about the first brain implants that were surgically inserted in 1974 in the state of Ohio, of course, in the United States, and also in Stockholm, Sweden. Brain electrodes were inserted into the skulls of babies in 1946 without the knowledge of their parents. And in the 1950s and 60s, electrical implants were inserted into the brains of animals and humans, especially in the United States, during research into behavior modification and brain and body functioning, or mind control methods. And these were used in attempts to change human behavior and attitudes. Influencing brain function became an important goal of the military and intelligence services. So now we advance, we look back 30 years ago, brain implants even showed up in x-rays the size of 1 centimeter, and then subsequent implants shrunk to the size of a grain of rice. And many of you might have your animals chipped, because certainly here in California, if you rescue an animal, they are all RFID chipped. I even discovered, Jeff, when we were touring a fish hatchery, that the little baby salmons, a percentage of those are chipped. And when I asked how do they pick up the signals during the migration of the fish. And
that's hard to believe. I believe you, but I mean, they're pinning some of these tags in little fingerlings. The little babies. Yeah.
Yes. And when they release them, they're tracking and monitoring them. And I asked them, where are they picking up the signals on the migration of the fish with these tracking devices? And this is in the instance of the Russian River, which is a river that runs fairly close to Bohemian Grove on out to the Pacific Ocean here in Sonoma County. And I was told that they're putting devices on either side of the banks. They're hidden where they can monitor the fish. Well, I think it's important for everyone to understand the degree of the reality that we have a de facto government structure, and we, in fact, are the enemy. I think we can now realize that. I certainly hope people are starting to realize that. I have known through my life people that have attempted to escape out of European countries during war, and typical routes are through waterways and streams and culverts, etc. In the case of Cuba, people would attempt to swim from Cuba to Guantanamo. Little did they know they would not have wanted to have been successful in going to Guantanamo, but few made it. But having said that, waterways were a very common method of escape. And it's interesting that with the increasing intention and the fact that many people are likely RFID chipped unwittingly, they just don't know it. In fact, this was certainly discussed back during the time of John Glenn, and he was talking about the fact that in January of 1997 there was an initiative with U.S. Senator John Glenn about the dangers of radiating civilian populations and targeting people's brain function with electromagnetic fields and beams from helicopters and airplanes and satellites, even from parked vans, neighboring houses, telephone poles, electrical appliances, mobile phones, TV, radio, etc., is all part of the radiation problem that we all face. So when we look at the expansive mind control network that has been set up over many, 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 many decades, and that has been a goal, total mind control, and we look at some of the documents, Jeff, that we have posted on our website. In fact, one of the documents that is really important for everyone to take a look at, it's on the home page, but you can also type it in the search bar at the top of stopthecrime.net, Aquarius Operations Briefing. And this was actually given to us through Dr. Preston James. And it talks about the planned chemical sedation of the population and then the use of radio microwave frequencies for mass mind control. And it specifically talks about how over many, many years we would be poisoned with chemicals. There would be a polypharmaceutical saturation, and that's already been achieved. And that's been ongoing for the past 20 years. And then there would be the introduction and exposure to everyday use of public water supplies that are poisoned and airborne pollutants. In other words, the full array of the poisons that we've already been seriously saturated with, and then how the increased use of frequencies would work in tandem with the saturation levels of the poison. And it would literally turn a person into an assassin. It would take over their mind. Again, this is the Aquarius Operations Briefing. It's about a 50-page document. The last few pages shows cell phone towers and other methods in which these frequencies would be used upon the population. But Ronnie Kildee talked about how today's microchips operate by means of low-frequency radio waves that target people.
Yep.
And with the help of satellites, the implanted person can be tracked anywhere on the globe. I can tell you, Jeff, right now, many people are buying frequency equipment. They can be as much as $20 up to $300.
What do you mean frequency equipment?
Well, you run it over your body, and it will literally
it's a
alert
reader.
you whether you've been biomedically implanted.
Got it. Yeah.
Yes. That's going to become something rather important for
I'm sure it will.
To obtain. I hear us going into
I
a
hear
break.
music too. Hold on.
And then I want to get into the water situation quickly.
All right, very good. Stand by. We'll be right back. Okay, and we're back with Deborah. All right, Deborah, talk to us about water.
Well, yes, Jeff, actually, this is an action alert request for all listeners, and request to pass this information out as far and wide as everyone that is listening and beyond is able to. We run a website entitled primarywater.org, and that links to primary water experts as well. But on primarywater.org, we have half-page double-sided flyers that everyone can download and disperse. But, of course, everyone needs to understand first what primary water is. Because of primary water, we do not have a water shortage. Water is renewable. And there are incredible documents that all of you can get to on primarywater.org. Understand that we have been deceived on how water and where water really comes from. There's an excellent YouTube up. It's entitled Primary Water Explained. Primary Water Explained. It's important to understand that the Earth is the water planet. And primary water is good news, and it will provide us with all the water we need. And we're being really hit with media psyops and a massive campaign.
Well, the government has a huge budget to hire people to work for the Internet, to work the media, you name it, and they're working it all the time.
They certainly do. Now, I want to just go over some of the new rules here in California, and by far they're more than I've got time to go over right this moment. But one of the ones that should be extremely worrisome for everyone is this. Again, these are new rules. The state is going to be directing state departments to provide temporary relocation assistance to families who need to move from homes where domestic wells have run dry to housing with running water. Now, this is why understanding where water comes from is essential, because we have many overpumped groundwater basins, and some of the shallow wells are overpumped and they are running dry. However, given time and reduced pumping, they would likely refill.
Mm-hmm.
And the groundwater basins could be recharged much more expeditiously if primary water wells were drilled and that water was allowed to recharge these overpumped areas like the San Joaquin Valley. And this is essential for everyone to know. Every bit of land mass is floating on water, and that's why it's so important to watch the YouTube Primary Water Explained and go to primarywater.org for more information. But I want to just go over a couple of the recent media psyops campaigns that have just come out in the last couple of days. Our Governor Brown has urged fines up to $10,000 for water waste during this California drought. Now, of course, most of us know the drought is intentionally created. But Brown announced this past Tuesday, that they're going to be granting new enforcement powers to local agencies in California's ongoing drought, including penalties.
What do you mean when you say local agencies? And talk a bit louder again, if you can.
Yes, they're going to be granting enforcement powers to
what local agencies?
Now, it does not enumerate, but I would be imagining we're talking about the water agencies, we're talking about city agencies.
Your friendly water meter reader, while there's still any around?
Well, certainly many people do not yet have smart meters on their water, but they will be sending Stasi groups around. This has been going on now for a while in some areas, where good want-to-be neighbors will report on other neighbors if they see what appears to be overuse of water. But it goes on to say that the governor's office said that legislation proposed by Brown would let public agencies deputize staff to issue water-related citations among other measures.
Yeah.
And you might think this is just another installment in a long enterprise to live with changing climate and with drought and uncertain duration, Brown said. So the fines are a water increase. Easier to blame people for overuse than to try to push and get fines approved. So this is a water increase. They're making certainly the original conversation of $500 fines seem rather tolerable when you now hear $10,000 water fines. So this is just a psychological adjustment to, of course, accept the $500 fine. I also want to point out that most recently, too, just a day or so ago, Governor Brown also increased the California's greenhouse gas emission targets, and they're getting tougher. And my comment on this, of course, is climate change policies are creating new global markets, and it's based upon greed and false science.
Oh, you bet. Sure.
Of concealing the real cause of climate change. And, of course, we know most people know that the government, corporations, and militaries and international bankers control the weather and have weaponized weather to target, create fear, and drive relocation of populations into resilient cities. Resilient cities, interestingly enough, Jeff, were pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation, and they are intended to help communities absorb shock and better respond emotionally to destruction and death. Resilient cities are engaged in reducing CO2 emissions.
Resilient cities, boy. You drive into a town, there'll be a big billboard there. This is a resilient city. It used to say this is a tree city. Now it'll say it's a resilient city.
Well, that's true, and the resilient cities are engaged in reducing CO2 emissions and identifying people that are not trauma prepared. So resilient cities are about making and helping people emotionally and physically adopt and adapt to the shocks and trauma of all
crazy.
The weaponization that we're facing.
It's crazy.
It is.
Everybody who breathes should be declared a public enemy and taxed because they spew carbon dioxide. I mean, it's all nuts.
Well, it is, and because it's getting more nuts by the minute, it's important for everyone that's listening to take some action. And
what can they do? No, seriously, what can they really do? If they send off an email, the delete key. Goodbye. If they fax, the trash can.
Well,
if they mail...
I think, Jeff, what we have to do is empower people to the knowledge of water. Certainly because we cannot live without water. And whether it serves us in ultimately benefiting by getting to it, just the knowing that the water science is being withheld from us, just like petroleum. We were always told that petroleum is a fossil fuel. And we know now that that was just all part of what Rockefeller did to create more profits with the illusion of a finite resource. And as we like to say, petroleum never came from dead dinosaurs. So just as water is now the new peak oil, it's now the new peak water, and that's not true. And while those of us that understand this are still alive, we must spread this information far, far and wide, because the water surfaces many places all over the planet in hot and cold springs. In fact, there's a wonderful photograph on the primarywater.org website of a geyser called Fly Geyser, F-L-Y Geyser, and it's on private property in Nevada. And it was actually a well that was dug about 100 years ago, and they hit water that was about 200 degrees. They capped it, and the cap eroded over time, and the water just has been spewing out consistently ever since. It's a geyser called Fly Geyser. It's quite beautiful, and the landowner at the time drilled in another location and hit water, not hot water. But right now, the governor in California, just a couple of days ago, has set new cuts for us to meet the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. He's cutting emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. The previous goals, which were set during Schwarzenegger's administration, were to reach 1990 levels by 2020, and then 80% below the standard by 2050. So let me repeat this. We must reduce greenhouse gas emissions here in California 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Now, it's very important to understand where they're really going. And I have a YouTube up and out. They're aiming for 0. And, Jeff, I don't have time in the next couple of minutes that we have left, but I believe I am going to be joining you tomorrow evening. Yeah. And tomorrow evening I am going to break a story that few have heard about new cities being planned here.
Now, this is very interesting. Yeah. They've got plans they never let out of the bag, and they're big plans.
And I'm also going to be talking about the plans to burn up Northern California. So I'm looking forward to joining you tomorrow night. Take care, and
Thank you.
I'll be talking with you tomorrow evening. And, of course, everyone can join me on my show, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, Monday through Friday on the RINS Radio Network. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Deborah. Say hi to Lou. Okay.
I will. Thank you.
All right, that's our program tonight. Yours truly is going to try and rest, and we will be back tomorrow night. You take care.